So as I said before, since English is the working language of the Bologna process, if you allow me, I will try to deliver my presentation in English, but at the same time, I have tried to put most of the things that I'm going to say on the slides, even though that's generally not advisable, but for this one, for this occasion, I thought it's good to have it in print. And should you not understand some of the issues, please feel free to raise your hand and I'll try to translate them into English. Also, the question and answer session, I'll be happy to reply in Romanian, and in the question and answer session I'll be happy to reply in Romanian as well. So my presentation will aim at three main purposes. Firstly, to introduce the European higher education area. Secondly, to make a small overview from different points of view of the implementation and of the status of the Bologna process. And finally, I would like to make some considerations about the challenges and opportunities in this region of Europe, perhaps. And I hope that these would apply to the Republic of Moldova as well, but I'm of course relying on you to tell me whether I'm right or wrong. In the first introductory part, I wanted to make some small points about the Bologna process. I'm sure that most of you are aware of what the Bologna process is. However, I would like to perhaps start again by saying that it is an evolving international policy cooperation process based on voluntary adherence to common goals and to joint cooperation. And this is perhaps important because many times we talk about what the Bologna process asks us to do or what the Bologna process imposes. And the Bologna process does none of these things. It is the ministry on behalf of the country who commits to the goals of the Bologna process, and then it is up to the ministry and up to the institutions and to the academic communities to keep these promises to the other member states. So it is not an intergovernmental body which imposes things, far from it. As I said, there are 47 member countries. The Republic of Moldova joined in 2005. The last member joined in 2010, and that is Kazakhstan. And the number of members evolved from 30 members in 1999 in the ministerial conference in Bologna to 47 in 2010. The European Union is represented as a whole, although all of the countries are also represented individually, but is also represented as a whole by the European Commission as another member. And if you want to know how a country can join the Bologna process, well, there are two criteria. One of them is to be a part of the Council of Europe European Cultural Convention. And secondly, the country has to commit and have the willingness to pursue and implement the Bologna process goals and action lines. So this would be all. This was set in the ministerial conference in Berlin in 2003. I mentioned a little bit about the set of values and fundamental principles. So regardless of what we do when it comes to structural implementation, cycles, quality assurance, mobility, and so on, they have to be implemented keeping these values and principles in mind, and I won't insist on them. What made this process successful is the high level of stakeholder involvement and participation. Even if in 1999 students were not part of the process, or institutions were not all part of the process, in 2001 this was acknowledged as a key factor for the success of the process by the ministers, and European umbrella organizations of all of the stakeholders were involved. And finally, the process functions, the decision-making is done by the ministers. Every 2 years they meet and they take forward with their decisions the direction of the process, but also there is a so-called Bologna follow-up group, which meets every semester, and it includes representatives of the ministries responsible for higher education in all the 47 member states, plus representatives of the consultative members. Of course, this group does not manage to discuss every 6 months everything, so it sets up thematic, very focused working groups chaired by a country or by one organization, which involves other members as well. And these working groups now, we have 7 working groups and 4 networks, and I'll explain a bit further what are they and what do they do. So this is a short overview of where the ministers met and where the decisions were taken for furthering the process. There is another conference which is not listed here for slide references. It was the anniversary conference in Budapest and Vienna last year, which launched the European higher education area. Until 2010, we could only talk about the Bologna process. Now we talk about both the Bologna process and the European higher education area. As you will see, the conference in Bucharest next year will be the conference which takes place most to the east. It's the most eastern ministerial conference of the Bologna process that we have seen so far. We hope that it will not remain so. So we hope that many other countries which are now part of the process will be able to be active and host one of these conferences as well. A few words about what the priorities seem to have been in the past decade and what the priorities have been set for this new decade. So before the Leuven Ministerial Conference in 2009, and this conference also set the agenda for until 2020, we had the thematic priorities on the left of the slide. When the ministers met, they set some priorities which fed into the current work plan, which includes priorities until 2012. And you will see that some of the issues were just translated as they were before. Other issues were new, and these are the ones circled with yellow. For example, student-centered learning and the teaching mission of higher education became very important in the new decade. Similarly, multidimensional transparency tools and funding of higher education only became part of the discourse in the Bologna process in 2009. But you also see some areas which seem to not have a direct correspondent. And coincidentally, these are exactly the areas, perhaps, where most work has been done and where most implementation work is still due. And this will probably be acknowledged in Bucharest. So, indeed, we aim for more implementation, we aim for a more systemic approach and to move to the more difficult action lines. Of course, social dimension or mobility are much more complex, perhaps, than a structural move to a 3-cycle system. But obviously, there is still a lot of work to be done when it comes to the cycles as well. I talked a little bit about working groups. There are currently 7 working groups working under the authority of the Bologna Follow-up Group, and these are the topics that they cover. Romania is, for example, chairing the working group on international openness. Germany chairs the group on mobility. The Council of Europe chairs the group on qualification frameworks. Latvia chairs the group on recognition. Luxembourg and Latvia chair the group on reporting, on the implementation of the Bologna process, and that is a very important group because it aims to deliver the ministers a situation of where we are with the Bologna process before the ministerial conference. Spain chairs social dimension, and the Flemish Community of Belgium chairs the transparency tools one, just to see how spread they are. There are also 4 networks. And these networks are a bit more loose in their structure, in the sense that they're aimed rather at exchange of good practice than issuing policy recommendations. So they're the perfect opportunity to meet your counterparts from another country and try to learn from one another. And there are 4 of them: information and promotion, national qualification framework correspondence, which works closely with the qualifications frameworks working group, the Network for Experts of Student Support in Europe, or NESI. Guess who the chair of that was initially? It was Ireland. And the Recognition of Prior Learning Network. A little bit about what we do, what my colleagues and I do. We provide neutral support, neutral in the sense of we don't support the interest of a specific country or organization. We aim to support all countries equally. So even though we're hosted by Romania, we are serving all 47 member states. And we want to help the Bologna Follow-up Group consolidate the European higher education area under the exclusive authority of the Bologna Follow-up Group chairs and vice chairs. The Bologna follow-up group is chaired in turn by 2 countries. One of them is the EU presidency, the other one is a non-EU country in alphabetic order. Now the chairs are Poland and Armenia, and for the next semester, and for the ministerial conference, the chairs will be Denmark and Azerbaijan. Now, this secretariat does a little bit more than minute-taking. I mean, even though it sounds as if we do a lot of communication work and a lot of, I don't know, minute-taking, it's true, we do that as well, but we also prepare the background documents under the coordination of the chairs, and we also act as a nexus of communication. So all information that comes in and all the information that comes out usually passes through us. We keep the archives of the Bologna process and the website, and we also disseminate information in events such as these. So, well, it's a lot of work, and previous secretariats have been excellent in supporting the process and giving it an impetus. Now, I like a metaphor when it comes to the Bologna process. People say, well, it's a reform, we have to obey, we have to fulfill the standards, we have to make sure that we reach the goals. But my favorite way of talking about the Bologna process is that it builds bridges. It does not impose a harmonized vision. It does not make countries imitate each other, but it builds bridges. And you know that sometimes bridges span across accidents of geography, so over a valley or over a pit. Well, I like to believe that in this case, the Bologna process spans across accidents of human mind, and those are national borders or regulations which hamper cooperation between institutions. And this is not I can't take the credit for the metaphor, it belongs to Jules Bergen from the Council of Europe. So I think this is a very nice way of thinking about the process, and it's a very nice way to understand that it is a tool for cooperation. It is not a tool for harmonization. I will pass very quickly, to an overview of the implementation. I guess you all have this in your folders. The last stock-taking report, how countries stand in terms of implementation, according to their own reports. So it's not an independent evaluation, but it's the countries saying how they're doing. You have circled how Moldova fares, and the traffic light system that you see here obviously means that green is, good, yellow, so-and-so, and red, there are still things that need to be done. I thought it's interesting to see a bit about the contribution of stakeholders in the implementation of the Bologna process, because we hear a lot about what the government has to do, but we also have to see what we can do, what each of us can do to implement Bologna. And at the European level, we have some very good examples, which maybe can convince you that stakeholders can also contribute. For example, most of the quality assurance framework was entrusted to 4 organizations, the so-called E4 group. They have drafted the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance, which now stand as a reference point at the European level, and they were entrusted by the ministers to set up the European Quality Assurance Register, and I won't go much into that because I know that my colleague Colin Tuck will go into that later. The target that we talk now a lot in mobility, 20% mobile students by 2020, was, if you didn't know, launched by the European Students' Union at the 20th anniversary of Erasmus. And this was later on supported by the Commission and many other states. But as a political idea or goal was well born then. The social dimension of higher education was introduced by the European Students' Union as well in 2001, not 2011, fortunately, but this was their contribution, and this is when they also joined the Bologna process as a consultative member. The European University Association is perhaps the most important actor in linking higher education and doctoral education and research, as well as trying to link the European research area with the European higher education area. Business Europe, as a representative of employers, argues for employability and the link with the labor market, and they put this on the agenda. The Council of Europe leads the work on qualification frameworks and on public responsibility of higher education, and, well, keeps the value compass where it should be. And the European Students' Union and Education International, which represents academic staff, placed student-centered learning more firmly on the agenda with their project, which tried to explore what that means and what that should mean in terms of implementation at the institutional and national level. So you see, it's not just the governments who can move things along in Bologna, it's the stakeholders to a great extent as well. In short, there was an independent assessment of the Bologna process in 2010. It was commissioned by the BFUG, paid by the European Commission, and it came up with some results. First of all, it's clear that the education landscape in Europe changed. Perhaps with the exception of social dimension, where things stayed pretty much as they stood before. This is why it's such a big priority now. Because a lot of countries joined the Bologna process after its inception, we have a so-called two-speed Bologna. So there are countries which are closer to the structures and political goals than others. And this is something that we have all to work together. And this is perhaps why the minister said we need another 10 years to see this Bologna promise happening. However, don't think that there is any country which ticks green in all the boxes. There is no such thing. All countries fare well in some things and less well in others. And this is why perhaps the minister said we need to commit to full and proper implementation of all the agreed objectives. As I said, stakeholder participation is key for moving along. I mean, if you have the academic communities opposing the process, you're not going to get very far, even with 20 years' time. And, of course, what was successful is not just sanctions and legislation, but a mix of support and incentives and reform. So you need to do both, right? You need to encourage and sometimes you need to legislate and perhaps in extreme cases to sanction. Well, what led to different versions of the Bologna process? We all know that the Bologna process looks different according to every country. You might think it's the same, but it is not. And that is due to several factors. Different challenges, so we have system inefficiencies like dropout rates, high dropout rates, low participation rates, and we have sometimes limited systemic flexibility. We had to do more things at once, so some countries had to increase quality, widen participation, set up structures, too many things at once, which was very burdensome for some national systems, so governments chose to do them in turn. So then the Bologna process looks sometimes different from country to country. And of course, we had different traditions. I mean, universities looked differently across Europe historically, and that influences the way in which the Bologna process was implemented. And of course, everything is subjective, so sometimes we interpret things ourselves differently. I mean, I don't think across the room everyone understands the same by the Bologna process, so, and that's natural up to a point. Now, some glimpses of what the ministers will have to say something about in 2012. The report on the Bologna process implementation draft version says that Bologna tools were implemented, but not necessarily linked to each other. So we have diploma supplement, we have ECTS, we might have qualification frameworks, but how they all work together is a mystery sometimes. And one of the keys that was seen in moving these along is to start linking the tools that we have worked hard on implementing. One of the keys is learning outcomes. So ECTS, diploma supplement, qualification frameworks, even quality assurance will all work in more harmony if a true learning approach orientation would be taken. Of course, that with the crisis, but not only with the crisis, access, progress, and success in higher education has become a key issue. If we don't manage to unlock the potential of our own population, not much will come out of the Bologna process. And mobility is still seen as the hallmark of the European higher education area, but there are more concerns about imbalances, and that should be an important topic here, and about the link with social dimension. Finally, I'll move to the last part, the challenges and opportunities. Now, this is a very personal interpretation, so don't take this as the official word of the Bologna process, but what I see as challenges in the Southeast European countries are that sometimes we confuse them with an acquis communautaire, we confuse them with the EU policy making, and that's not the same thing. There are areas of overlap, but in no way implementing the Bologna process will be seen as a tick box for joining the European Union. This is something that you should want to do for yourselves, and we should all want to do for ourselves, and not something that we want to do for Europe to be happy. There is a lack of tradition in stakeholder involvement, sometimes for historical reasons, but also due to the lack of tradition in debating things publicly. So it's very difficult, and sometimes this is not due to lack of government wish to involve stakeholders, but it's sometimes also due to the lack of capacity on the side of stakeholders to address all the issues where they should be involved. And this is something that takes time, and this is something that we should all support to increase. There is resistance to implementation of the Bologna process from the side of universities, and there are misunderstandings regarding the aims of the Bologna process. Sometimes the Bologna process does not aim to do what we think it aims to do at the national level. And more understanding of what the minister is really committed to at the European level would perhaps help in making institutions come on board and help with the implementation rather than resist it. There is insufficient data collection. There is a problem across Europe on that, but perhaps here it's more dire. And there is mimetism of higher education reforms seen in other contexts. And this is something I think we should really look at. There is no universal recipe for cooking Bologna. There is not. Every country has its own specificities and its own history, and according to that, Bologna has to become an implementation reality. Otherwise, we will see, and we have seen very many mistakes in implementation because we just try to copy-paste something from another country. It doesn't work, unfortunately. Insufficient funding, and this was mentioned before, but that seems to, come to the attention of ministers, and perhaps it will change. Little possibility for accessing EU funds, which helped a lot EU countries in implementation of the Bologna process. And at the European level, sometimes there is a lot of bureaucracy for Bologna follow-up group members to get a mandate. So sometimes they're very silent, which means that Bologna at the European level does not look like all 47 countries want it to look like, but it looks like the countries which speak up want to look like. And this is something that needs to change if Bologna is to be suitable for Eastern European countries as well. And finally, there are not so many regional dialogues, and in this sense, I really admire this initiative and everything that the Council of Europe is doing to foster regional dialogue, because in the same region, we usually have more common problems, and perhaps we can find more common solutions. And enough with the bad part, the opportunities. First of all, I think that there is a real opportunity here with the investment in higher education and in tapping into the full potential of talents. There is a lot of talent in this part of the world, and I think that education is the way of unlocking it. Increasing access and success should thus be an aim. Not just research results, not just increasing quality and international recognition, but making the difference, adding the value to our societies. So we need to also fulfill the Bologna promise, and this is an opportunity. If we understand learning outcomes now, and if we link the tools now, we might have the opportunity to be one of the front runners in 2020. There is an opportunity to increase regional and European level cooperation and exchange of good practice, and just take the word. I mean, whenever in every conference you go, you should be talking about what's happening in your country and make other people understand and learn from other people as well. And finally, I think the Bologna process should be a mirror, more than it is now, as I said, of the things which are needed in this part of the world. So set up a national Bologna follow-up group meeting involving all the stakeholders. You should be active at the European level, and you should increase cooperation of universities in the Republic of Moldova with other universities, because this is the way of gaining knowledge and gaining implementation expertise. And finally, I shouldn't have placed this the last perhaps, move towards student-centered learning, so that the students, which in the end are the aim, I mean, and not only the development of students and the employability of students is something that we work towards, but this is how our systems should look like as well. You should ask, what is the student gaining, not how am I teaching? And this is perhaps something that we all need to sink in slowly. Thank you, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to